I grew up in Washington, D.C. I'm the only child. My dad was a government man. My mother worked, and I took an affinity to swimming competitively in high school. And at Woodrow Wilson High School in Washington. And then I won a few medals. Then I had an opportunity to go to the Woodward School for Boys, and 3 blocks from the White House. In order to go to school, I had to ride the bus every morning down to downtown Washington and back. It was affiliated with the YWCA. They used their athletic facilities. We used the football stadium right across from the White House, and in Lafayette Square was an athletic field. You could spit on it from the White House fence. And so I swam, and we had a canoe. A guy and I bought a used canoe. We kept it down near Georgetown University on the Potomac River. In the summer, we'd take dates and go down the river to listen to the National Symphony Orchestra, who had a barge by the Lincoln Memorial where they let boats in between the steps and the barge. So we'd listen to the National Symphony Orchestra, then paddled in the dark back up to the boathouse and put the canoe away. And I had a pretty good life. I was a lifeguard for a while in the summers, and then I learned to fly. We had a bowling field in Anacostia Naval Air Station in the Washington area, and Camp Springs, which is now Andrews Air Force Base. And I took an interest in aviation, so I'd hitchhike out at the Congressional Airport between Rockville and Bethesda, Maryland, or ride I had a Whizzer motorbike on my bicycle, a little from the Western Auto Stores. I think it was a $50 motor you hooked up to your bike. And so I propped airplanes, because airplanes didn't have starters. And the CPT, Civilian Pilot Training Program, was in big time for college students. They teach you to fly for nothing. But I was a high school student. I wasn't eligible for that. So the operator of the airport was buying up all the airplanes he could buy, open cockpit biplanes, Piper Cubs, and he needed prop boys. And I didn't want the money, I wanted the flying lessons. So that's what I did. I traded my labors for flying lessons. And I got quite a few hours, and then all the instructors were being called up to go in the service after we got in the war. I mean, they were well qualified. So I had an opportunity to get more flying time by doing a little apple dusting, which was illegal as a student pilot because I didn't have a commercial license, but they didn't care. So we'd go up and dust all the apples up and around Gaithersburg, Maryland, all the big apple farms. And then my time came to go in the service into the Cadet Corps. I'd passed the exams for the Army Air Corps. And so we were said, there's a waiting list, so you've got to go enlist as an enlisted man, and which I did. And they sent me to Fort Myer, Virginia, in the ceremonial horse stables. And I remember the old sergeant said, "Boy, this is a pitchfork, and you know this is a stable. You know what's on the ground, and you're going to pitch that stuff." I said, "What did I get myself into?" But pretty soon I got orders to go in the Army Air Corps down in Keesler Field, Mississippi. They didn't have any barracks. We were in tents on the beach there by the Gulf of Mexico. And we hung around and we washed dishes and marched. And then pretty soon we got a troop train that we all got in. I think we had bunks 3 deep and porta potties and K rations. And we had no idea where we were going. So the train stopped and would call some names and people would get out. And then we got stuck in the Kansas City stockyards for a week because we were low priority. And then the train started up again and we were pretty raunchy. And stopped and called my name, and I got out with my duffel bag, and I looked up the little train station sign, Cedar Rapids. We were in Iowa. I had no idea where Iowa was. And Coe College. We were pre-aviation cadets at Coe College for 3 months. We studied physics, math, chemistry, and different subjects, and marched and flew these little Piper Cubs they had my instructor was 74 years old, Oscar Youngsburg. I will never forget his name. He was a hell of a pilot. And so I flew with him, and we finished that, and then we got on a train again, not knowing where we're going, and we ended up heading west. And I remember coming in to get water for the engine at a place called Las Vegas. It was just a watering hole and a sandwich shop. There wasn't anything there. And we kept going after there. We ended up in Santa Ana, California. Big pre-flight, over 2,000 cadets. And we took psychomotor tests, physical exams, and all kinds of crazy tests. And they divided us up between pilot, bombardier, and navigator. And then they washed out about 30%. So I was assigned to a pilot side. The next station was King City, California, flying the Ryan ST all-metal low-wing primary trainer, the only low-wing metal trainer they had. And I had a former Flying Tiger instructor, Mr. Buckland, and he had 4 students. And the fact that I had a license, he didn't spend much time with me. So then we graduated there, and we went on to Marana, Arizona, in the middle of nowheres in the desert between Phoenix and Tucson. And went to basic flying. And then we graduated there. We lost about 30% along the way, the war side. And then you had to make a decision between single engine, attack, or P-38s, or bombers. And I asked for night fighters. Which was the Black Widow, the P-61. I didn't get it. I went to Marfa, Texas, down in the hill country. It was a big twin-engine advanced flying school. And I graduated there as a second lieutenant. Half the class graduated as flight officers, which was a warrant officer. They don't have that rating anymore. And so I was sent from there to Del Rio, just down the road a piece, to fly the Flying Prostitute, the Martin B-26. No visible means of support because of short wing and high speed takeoff. We lost a lot of planes down there, and so we graduated, and they didn't want any more people overseas, so they said, well, you're going up to Midland, Texas to fly bombardiers. You're going to take these planes and fly bombardiers. But they had short runways up there. And right off the main Highway 80, east to west highway. And we'd come in 10 feet over the highway, and we'd wear the brakes out because of the short runway. So they said, no more of that. So they shipped us to Victorville, California. And we went there. They didn't know what to do with us. It was about, I guess, about 100 of us. Then they shipped us from there to Albuquerque, New Mexico, flying B-24s for 25 hours. And I said, 25 hours? For what? We're going to combat? No, you're going to B-29s. You're going to be a co-pilot. Then they shipped us to Roswell, New Mexico from there for the first B-29 school. I went through that, and then we went to Lincoln, Nebraska to crew up. I had a captain been a former B-17 pilot and instructor. I had a captain for bombardier and a captain for the flight engineer, and I was the second lieutenant co-pilot. And we went to Gulfport, Mississippi, combat crew training. And we went through combat crew training, and we graduated, and they shipped us up to Kearney, Nebraska to get a new airplane. in the middle of the winter, and we got our new airplane, and we were ready to take off, and the first atomic bomb was already dropped. So we went to Tucson, Arizona, and they disbanded the crew, and they shipped me to Tinian Island with a 509th Bomb Composite Group as a B-29 co-pilot. Well, the second bomb had been dropped by then, and I said, and they were ready to come home. The 509th, the war was over for them. As a composite group, but not really. They shipped a bunch of us to Kwajalein Island, and they were still shoveling bodies in pillboxes as we landed down there. But we were getting ready for Project Crossroads, which was the first post-war atomic explosion. And they shifted me into flying C-54s between Roswell and Kwajalein Island. And our job was we had an airline running from Roswell to Chattanooga, Tennessee, to Hansford, Washington, to Chicago, to Washington, D.C., picking up scientists. Chicago was the first nuclear, under the University of Chicago, was the first nuclear reactor. We pick people up there. Then we go to Washington, then we go to Hansford, out in the West Coast where the plutonium and uranium operation was. Then we go to Chattanooga where the heavy water for the bomb was. We'd pick people up and bring them to Roswell, then take them out to Kwajalein. And then the bomb went off, the first one, and I came home and I said, I've got one semester of college. What am I going to do? And the war was going down, so I told Colonel Blanchard, who had taken Colonel Tibbetts, who was a Enola Gay pilot, a former commander. And he said, well, Ken, we don't have any programs for university. So I said, I want out. And I got out and went to school, back to Washington and American University, but I had a proviso I had to stay in and fly on the weekends. So I flew in the 15th Night Fighter Squadron, protecting the Washington area after the war was over. We had P-51s. And pretty soon the reserve outfit was getting kind of shaky, so they shifted us over to the D.C. Air National Guard, flying P-47s, doing the same thing. Weekend warriors. And I flew the Jug for quite a few hours over there, and when I graduated, I was sent to Richmond, Virginia, and they transferred me to the Virginia Air National Guard. Same outfit in the wing, the fighter wing. And then we were called up for Korea. And they shipped us to SAC Fighter Escort in Georgia. Then we went to Godman Air Force Base, Fort Knox, Kentucky. And we gave all our planes to the Yugoslavian Air Force. We taught them to fly the Jug, and then we were being shipped out individually. I was shipped to Panama City, Florida, in a classified course in interceptors. Then I was shipped to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Pope Air Force Base, as allegedly with a 5th Radar Calibration Squadron and Forward Air Controller. We were to be dropped behind the lines and set up a mini radar station to bring the infantry forward. Well, it didn't pan out, whatever they wanted us to do, so they had a problem going up in the Arctic with radar, and so they shipped me up to the Newfoundland, to the 52nd International Air Rescue Squadron. It was Canadian and Air Force. And I stayed 4 years up there flying in the Arctic as an air rescue pilot. Probably the best job I ever had. Flying, we had to be qualified in every airplane. Helicopters, we had H-3, H-19 helicopters. We had SA-16 amphibians. We had 4 SB-29s with a big boat under the belly. we would drop over if we had to intercept an airliner. And then we had some SC-47s that had skis, and we had some de Havilland Beavers with floats in the summer and skis in the winter. And I got to fly Arthur Godfrey and General LeMay, both moose hunting in the fall and fishing in the summer when they'd come up out in the middle of nowhere. They'd spend a week. And so I thought my career has pretty well been mixed so far. Then I got orders to go to Washington, D.C. To meet an individual in a hotel, I forget the name of the hotel. And I was interviewed for a job, and then I waited in Washington for a couple of days, and they said, go back, you're going to be assigned to Tucson, Arizona. And but you're going to go to school in Washington, D.C. for 6 months in Quantico, Virginia. So I went to school as a special agent, counterintelligence agent. I went out of uniform. I'm in the Air Force, but I'm not. And got qualified in all the things that counterintelligence people learn and do, and firearms with the FBI at Quantico. And then I went to Tucson as a young special agent. And we had a big threat there I wasn't really aware of until I was assigned there. We had 2 SAC bomb wings with nuclear weapons. We had the boneyard out there with 5,000 airplanes sitting on the desert that all are not going to be junk. Most of them are just in interim storage. We had Atlas missile sites with nukes all around Tucson, and we were 90 miles from the border. So the Bureau and our people had a big job to protect that area. We had a lot of interdiction of heroin and marijuana coming up at that time. We had to do a lot of interdiction with the other government agencies. Then I was also a test pilot at the same time at the boneyard. I had to fly certain missions that I really don't want to discuss. And different type I flew 23 different type airplanes on ferrying here and there. And then I was assigned to Louisiana as a special agent in charge of the OSI there in Louisiana at England Air Force Base. It was a fighter base. And we had F-100s and T-33s. So I had a lot of T-33 time, and I was flying the T-33s as an instructor, and also operating out of uniform, flying with no rank on. And I put on air shows during the Armed Forces Day, acrobatic show if we didn't get the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds. So I had 3 years of putting on an air show with a T-33 with no tip tanks, and we'd put a JATO bottle on the belly, so it'd make it look good.
And then you stayed in the service all this time until Vietnam came around.
And then yes, I stayed in the service, and after there I was sent to Korea. I was involved as an AFK officer with special weapons. With fighters, F-100s, part of the 8th TAC fighter wing. We couldn't have nukes in Japan because they were outlawed, so we had our planes in Korea at Osan, K-55. And we would fly crews over every Thursday in a C-124 from Itazuki to relieve the crew that was going off. And we had about quite a few airplanes that were loaded. A very secure area. They were in revetments, ready to go. Most of the missions were pretty much one-way missions, if they ever called us to go. And then I rotated out of there to Dayton, Ohio, to working for a general I'd worked for in Louisiana, but it was part of the USAF headquarters up there in Dayton. And I stayed in Dayton, then they moved us to San Antonio, Randolph Field. I was in a staff job. And ready to retire. And they said, you can't retire, boy. You got too much flying experience. So you got to go to Vietnam. So I went up to Wichita, Kansas to learn to fly the F-105. And then I went to survival school in the Philippines on the way, and went over to Karat, an F-105 wing, and I flew our tour, and there were 3 wars. Most people didn't know that. The tour in the South was a year. Their loss ratio was about 8% of pilots. The tour in Laos, you didn't wear a uniform, you had no identification as a war, it didn't exist. Then there was a war over North Vietnam, which was 100 missions over the north. But our loss ratio got up to 64%. Because we had the SA-2 missiles, we had the Russian anti-aircraft weapons. Whoop, excuse me. Sorry about the interruption. I'll just let it go. And so I finished my tour there successfully. And then I was sent back. Allegedly, I was going to SINCPAC headquarters in Honolulu to go on the air staff there with a Navy admiral who was going to be our commander. My wife was ill in San Antonio, so they shipped me to San Antonio as chief of flight test for the School of Aerospace Medicine. And I got involved with them flying. I had four airplanes, 2 NF-100s, which were supersonic two-place, but they were special airplanes, not F-100s, NF-100s. They were designed for high Gs, negative Gs, and they had sophisticated physiology measuring equipment. We would take subjects in the back cockpit, we'd wire them up, and we'd shoot down over the Gulf of Mexico and go through a high G, negative G, and 0 G. That's straight up and then over. And we'd get all the physiology, and we'd telemetry it out of the airplane back to the computers at Wilford Hall Hospital in San Antonio. So I was involved in that. We had several projects going on with all the airplanes. We picked up animals from all over the pounds in the United States with our big C-97 for medical research on animals. They would bring them back and they'd debark them, and then they would do their work at the school.
Now, did you notice the technology changing, like from your survival kit from when you were in World War II through Vietnam and then even beyond?
That's what we were doing where I was. We designed a new G-suit, anti-gravitational suit. Instead of where we had to zip everything up, we had a little short corset-like and plug it into the plane, where the old G-suit we wore with flying fighters before, it was a pretty big garment. Which
of these 3 wars scared you the most?
I think Vietnam and was an enlightening war because of you understood what was going on, and some of it wasn't very popular. But with the loss ratio we had, it was a war that we flew out of. All the people over the north flew out of Thailand. Ubon, Udorn, Karat, and Tak Lee, and Nakhon Phanom. That's all we did. We were only flying over the north. And then about halfway through our tour, they started sending us up into Laos. And those missions, we'd have to take all our military, wear a suit with no rank, no dog tags, and we'd fly up and.
How many missions did you fly in Vietnam?
I flew 108 missions.
108.
The tour was 100.
What?
And I saw a lot of my young people working for me. They were either POWs or killed, or it was a war that didn't. We were part of an operation called Rolling Thunder, and slowing the attrition of material to the south. And it wasn't a very successful mission.
Going through everything you went through in all these wars, is there a piece of advice you would give to the younger generation now today?
Well, I think I saw a 4-star general just recently on TV up at the Air Academy lecturing the cadets up there. And it was an interesting lecture about responsibility and dedication, where they didn't seem to be getting through in their curriculum up at the academy to the extent that he wanted it to be done. Either accept it or get out, because you're going to have a lot of responsibility as a young second lieutenant when you come out, and that you don't really embellish while you're in school. And people are going to be looking up to you, your enlisted people. And I just saw in that war a lot of dedication of our maintenance crews, because our airplane took a lot of maintenance. We had a lot of hits, fragments and hits from flak or from other means. And they took a lot of work to keep those things going.
Well, I want to thank you.
And then,
great.
As I said, and then I had a wonderful opportunity after I came home from Vietnam. I participated on temporary duty at an area called 51. Most people don't even know what I'm talking about, but that's really where I guess my best flying was ever done. And
explain to us, what is Area 51?
It's a place that doesn't exist in the United States, a super testing facility. It's most people know it as Groom Lake. It's north of Las Vegas. And so I think Geraldo on television called it the home of the aliens. They had different names for it. They had called it Piranha Creek and different names. But it was a super group of people that were there dedicated to real high technology. And the flying that I did up there was probably the best I've ever done. And my wife called me, and because she didn't know where I was, we had telephones from every city there locally, so I could say I'm in LA, and I had a LA number. And she said, hey, you got to come home. I got a kid smoking pot back in San Antonio, needs daddy. You've been gone long enough in Vietnam. So I asked to get out, and got out. I went home and started another career for 15 years with a large company, very large, AIG. I was an engineer in the international division. I did very little work in the States. I was overseas most of the time, looking at heavy industry for risk analysis, chemical plants, automobile plants, paper, the largest paper plants in the world. And most of my tour was all in the Pacific area, New Zealand, Australia, and then I looked at all the hotels in the island that we insured, and Tahiti and Truk Island and New Caledonia.
Do you have children?
Yes.
Grandchildren?
Well, I had one left of the 4. I had 4 children, and 3 had gone, and one was So we brought him over to Sydney we were there for a year in Sydney, and right on the harbor. I had a condominium, and so my wife was a vacation for her. I was traveling all over the Pacific from there up to Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, and so she had a vacation there for a while, and we came back home, and then they sent me down to Central and South America, doing the same thing, and that's the Sandinista days, and things were pretty back almost to war for traveling down there and what I did. So I retired from AIG with another retirement, and got in the age of volunteerism and volunteering for Stephen's Lay Ministry on a hospice group. My wife and I took a year training to learn to work with the hospice groups. Then my wife developed Parkinson's with dementia, and it went from bad to worse, and we had to go to a nursing home, and she passed on, and that's how I ended up here.
And where are your children and grandkids?
Well, my grandchildren, are some in Fort Worth, Portland, Oregon, and San Diego, and Wiley, Texas. And my number 3 son died of a fast-moving lymphoma a year ago. He lived in Fort Worth. His daughter, he had 2 daughters, and one daughter is, she's an executive officer with the Great Northern Railway in Fort Worth, which is under who's the wealthiest man in the world? He bought out the Great Santa Fe Railway, huh? Who is it?
Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett,
Warren Buffett.
owns the company now, and he's taken her up like a ladder. They have a train accident. They fly her out to be the spokesman for the railway about the accident and public relations.
That's great.